Welcome to the Healthy Gut Podcast with Rebecca Coombs, the place where you can learn how to achieve a happy, healthy gut. Here's what's coming up on today's show. Welcome back to the Healthy Gut Podcast for Season 2. It's so exciting to be bringing you more fascinating interviews and information on all things SIBO with leading experts on gut health. We've had a little bit of a hiatus since the last episode aired at the end of 2017, and during this time I've been really busy finding just some fascinating people to bring back to the show so that I can continue to share knowledge, information and education with you, the SIBO patient and practitioner, so that you can feel empowered and inspired to keep going with your particular journey. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's listened to the podcast in Season 1. It's been just absolutely fantastic having you join me for Season 1, and I really look forward to having you join me with Season 2. And just to share some of the great feedback that I've had from the listeners, we had Cara F13 leave a message just saying that this podcast excites me greatly. Awesome, Cara. You gave us 5 stars as well. She says, thank you for having a podcast so specific as gut health. I am a gut health thirsty individual and I'm thrilled by your valuable content. I loved listening to the interview about mindset with Kristen. Reminders, check in with the role you give yourself. Is it healthy or unhealthy? If the people around you are still stuck in claiming you're the sick person you used to be, stake your claim of the new. Might need to remind people as well as yourself about the new healthy person you have become. Cheers to celebrating new healthy ways of living. Thanks, Cara, for just taking the time to write that down, and it's so true. What messages are we giving ourselves? Now, I've got lots to update you on, everybody, so I'll try and keep it quick. But one of the biggest updates for you since Season 1 finished is I went and retested for SIBO because I noticed that I was getting some symptoms again. Bloating and constipation were the main things that I was experiencing. And rather than letting it progress and thinking, is it SIBO, is it not SIBO, I bit the bullet and I went and redid a SIBO test, and lo and behold, my SIBO has returned. Now, since I first started my journey in 2015, I've done so much work on trying to understand why I developed SIBO in the first place. And what I have discovered in recent times is that adhesions are one of my really big underlying causes. I have been treated by Alyssa Tate, who's a visceral mobilisation therapist here in Australia, and we've since learned that my abdominal cavity is absolutely full of adhesions. My poor little small intestine, as well as so many other organs, are just completely wrapped up and twisted and stuck in these adhesions. So it's no wonder that I relapsed. If you're wondering what adhesions are, I really encourage you to go back and listen to episode 25 with Larry and Belinda Wern from Clear Passage Physical Therapies. And they were the people that I first heard speak that even alerted to me to the concept of adhesions. I've also interviewed Alyssa Tate in Season 1. And so that's episode 33, and she talks about visceral mobilisation and also chronic pelvic pain. She specialises in treating women with pelvic disorders and dysfunction, as well as adhesions. So if you'd like to go and learn more about what I'm now experiencing and treating, go and listen back to those 2 episodes. So I'm going to be sharing with you guys how I'm going with my journey. You can always follow me on my Instagram account and also Facebook pages to see how I'm going, and I do a lot of vlogs on my YouTube channel so you can keep up to date with what I'm doing. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to those people that made a contribution to the Healthy Gut podcast in season 1. In season 1, I fully funded the podcast, so that was all coming out of my savings, and I did put calls out to people to say, if you'd like to keep the podcast going, then if you are able to make any kind of contribution, that is so welcome. So a big thanks to Abby, Robin, Elise, Lorraine, Hartmut, Terry, Katrina, Glennis, Jackie, Siobhan, Karen, and so many more. So many people just made such wonderful contributions to the podcast in season 1. Now, I was hoping that I could keep this podcast advertisement free or sponsorship free, but I'm really sorry to say, guys, that's just not the case. It does cost quite a lot of money to bring this podcast to you every single week and to keep it free so that you don't have to spend a cent to listen to it. So this season, there will be some advertisements, and I have got some amazing sponsors who have come onto the show to help keep this podcast on the air. So do support them, guys. They are keeping this podcast going for another season, and I'm sure that you'll find the information that they're able to share with you really useful. In season 2, you've got the opportunity also to get exclusive members-only content. If you would like to get access to the full transcription from every single show, plus members-only specials and content and other great things, all you need to do is sign up to become a Healthy Gut podcast member. To do so, just head to thehealthygut.co/podcast and add your name and email address, and you will become a member. So it's absolutely free to become a member. And then you will receive an email the moment a show is released, including the full transcript and any special offers that I can offer you that episode. So you will not only never miss an episode, but you will be able to read along as you listen to the podcast. And I know this is really beneficial, particularly for those days when we're just dealing with brain fog and we just can't take the information in. Another really exciting thing I've got for you guys for season 2 is the opportunity for you to call in and ask me a question. I think this is really cool, and I can't wait to take your questions, guys. So this is your opportunity not only to hear yourself on your favourite SIBO podcast, but also have the opportunity to have your question answered by myself or potentially one of my special guests. Now, I know how valuable my SIBO coaching program is for my clients, so I want to share some of my handy hints and tips on how to live well with SIBO with you, as well as my 5 key pillars to health: awareness, nutrition, movement, mindset, and lifestyle. So by calling in and leaving me a message, this is your opportunity for you to have me answer those questions for you. It's completely free to leave me a voice message. You can do it any time of the day or night. All you need to do is head to thehealthygut.co/podcast and click on the button that says leave a voice message for the Healthy Gut podcast. You just do it via my website. It's completely free, and then it will send me a message with your podcast, and you might just hear yourself on your favorite podcast. I can't wait to share that with you. So make sure you do that today, guys, or very soon, so that you have the opportunity to get on the show. Coming up this season, we've got some amazing guests. I am thrilled to be able to announce that Dr. Mark Pimentel, the king of SIBO, is coming onto the show to talk all things SIBO with me. We've also got Dr. Stephen Sandberg-Lewis, who'll be talking about functional gastroenterology, and Dr. Satish Rao, who's going to be joining us to talk about SIBO and SIFO, which is fungal overgrowth. And we're talking about diet and nutrition with dietitian Kelly Isaacson from Cedars-Sinai, and so many more guests. Like with season 1, the show will air on a Tuesday morning Australian time, or that's Monday afternoon/evening in the US. Make sure you subscribe in Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you use to listen to the show so you don't miss an episode. And finally, don't forget to tell your friends and family about the show. I hear from people from all around the world who tell me that this podcast has helped them learn so much about their gut. So if you know anybody who has irritable bowel syndrome, SIBO, or any other gut-related issue, tell them to check out the Healthy Gut podcast. I'm sure they won't be disappointed. So let's get into today's show, guys. Sorry, that was quite a long introduction, but I've missed you and I've had so much to catch up on with you. Today we're joined by Dr. Terry Wahls. She's a clinical professor of medicine and best-selling author of the Wahls Protocol. She's recognised as an expert in nutrition and wellness and has inspired people all over the world to transform their health through diet and lifestyle. You will be fascinated by the story of her recovery from multiple sclerosis, which saw her not only coming out of her tilt-recline wheelchair within 12 months, but riding her bike 29 Ks. Dr. Wahls understands how diet and lifestyle may play a big role in our most common chronic health problems, much bigger than you can imagine. From the mitochondria in your cells to the bacteria in your gut, the neurons to the neurons in your brain. Today's show is absolutely fascinating, and I have had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Terry Wahls as she's here in Australia at the moment. And guys, make sure you keep listening to the end of the podcast because I have a very special offer just for you. So make sure you keep listening once my interview with Dr. Terry Wahls concludes, because I would hate for you to miss out on this special offer. So without further ado, here we go, guys. Season 2 is back on the airwaves, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome to the Healthy Gut podcast, Dr. Terry Wahls. It's wonderful to have you on the show today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
I have been a long fan of your work and just so inspired by the changes to your own health. You're a doctor, but also someone who has experienced firsthand what it's like to be absolutely debilitated with an illness. And for those listeners, and I'm not sure that there would be many out there, but there may be someone out there that doesn't know who you are. I'd love for you to tell my listeners a little bit about your story and your own experience with very debilitating illness and how you came to be doing some amazing things in the world today.
So I'm a internal medicine doc working at a large university. And at that point, I was really very skeptical of complementary alternative medicine. I really believed in the newest drugs and technology. And then in 2000, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis on the basis of a history of visual dimming 13 years earlier and a new problem with weakness in my left leg. I had a big workup with abnormal lesions in my spinal cord, abnormal spinal fluid, and was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS. And I knew I wanted to treat my disease aggressively using the newest drugs, the best people. So I did some research and found that the Cleveland Clinic was one of the best MS centers in the country. I went there, saw their best people, took the newest drugs, and still within 3 years, my disease had progressed to the point that I needed a tilt-recline wheelchair. And my disease was now in what's called the secondary progressive phase. At that point, there'd be no more spontaneous improvements or remission. And that's when I started on mitoxantrone. I continued to decline. Then I was placed on the new biologic drug, Tysabri. I continued to decline. Then I switched to Cellcept. I continued to decline. Now, I'll back you up for a moment. My Cleveland Clinic doctors had told me about the paleo diet in 2002, 2 years after diagnosis, when I was still walking around. And I read Dr. Cordain's papers, got his book, and decided that there was a rationale for what he was proposing. And so I, after a lot of prayer, because I'd been a vegetarian for 20 years, I went back to eating meat. And I gave up all grains, all legumes, all dairy, but it continued to decline. I stayed with it because I figured it might take several years to repair all the damage. Then I needed the wheelchair. Then I was on mitoxantrone. Then I was on Tysabri. Then I was on Cellcept. And it was clear that the best drugs were not stopping my slide into a bedridden and quite possibly demented life. I also had a lot of MS-related pain that was not well controlled. And so I was beginning to realize I may end up with refractory uncontrolled pain. And so that was when I began reading the science, and I would ultimately start reading basic science, animal model studies, focused on vitamins and supplements for MS and other diseases with shrinking brains, like Huntington's, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, and would figure out that mitochondria were a big driver in other diseases. And so I would develop a vitamin cocktail to support my mitochondria. And this slowed my decline, but it did not lead to recovery. By the summer of 2007, I could not sit up anymore. I was either in bed or in a zero gravity recliner. I could walk short distances using 2 walking sticks, and by short, like 10 yards. I could drive 10 minutes to work, but that was getting really quite tiring. I had severe fatigue by 10. I was beginning to lose my keys, my phone. Brain fog was getting to be a problem. Pain was more and more difficult to manage. My chief of staff told me he was putting me in the traumatic brain injury clinic and I wouldn't have residents. I'd be seeing patients directly, and I knew that was a job I probably could not do. And I'd be taking on those new responsibilities 6 months later in the middle of January. And so, that was a sort of a upsetting time. But, God works in mysterious ways. It was at that point that I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine and took their course on neuroprotection, had a longer list of vitamins and supplements that I was added. And then in the very end of 2007, I had another big aha moment, like, what if I took my list of vitamins and supplements and I restructured my paleo diet to stress these micronutrients? So that'd take actually several more months of research. And the Linus Pauling Micronutrient Institute was very helpful for me to figure that out. And so December 26th, I started this new way of structuring my paleo diet. And within 3 months, I was in the traumatic brain injury clinic. And to my surprise, I was able to do that clinic, and it was not exhausting me. At the end of 3 months, I was walking with a cane. At 6 months, I was walking throughout the VA hospital without a cane. At 9 months, I did a bike ride around the block the first time in probably 6 years. I'm crying, my wife's crying, my kids are crying. And that's really when I began to think that, well, who knew how much recovery might be possible? And then at 12 months, I was able to do a 20-mile bike ride with my family. And by this time, I have, really shifted the way I'm thinking about disease and health. I've shifted my focus from being focused on finding and using the latest drugs to talking to my patients about the quality of their diet and focusing more on diet and lifestyle interventions. And of course, it would change the focus of my clinical research, and it really would change everything.
I think it's a really important point that you make there around changing the focus. And I speak with a lot of people all over the world who have chronic digestive issues. And a common thing people say is, why can't I just take a pill? Why is there not just one drug I can take that's going to fix everything? Um, how did it must have been quite an interesting experience for you as a doctor to go through that transformation around being more
Yeah.
conventional with your therapy and your treatment with patients and yourself to then go, whoa, our nutrition actually is really fundamental.
You know, um, drugs can be very helpful if you have an infection, and we're going to give you an antibiotic that targets that particular infection, and then we can resolve that problem. Everything else is probably far more tied to the interaction of your genes and the environment, which means one pill isn't going to fix the environmental factors that contributed to your developing that health problem. And so I get it now. A pill will work well for an acute problem related to an infection. For everything else, it's going to be very important that you address the environmental factors that contributed to why you got yourself into that health compromise.
Before we dive into your nutrition principles, I'd like to just talk about the role of the digestive system or the gut and autoimmune diseases or chronic illness, and really how they're connected, in your opinion.
Well, Alessio Fasano yeah, did some brilliant work to identify something called zonulin, which is the gate that opens up um, the channels that will let fluid into and out of the intestinal lumen into the bloodstream. And so, if the gates are wide open, um, you have terrible diarrhea and you're losing your intravascular volume, and you poop out your fluids and die very quickly. That's the cause of cholera. And he was actually studying cholera at the time that he discovered this gate. If the gate's partly open, you can leak incompletely digested proteins from within your intestines into your bloodstream. And also coming along will be fragments from the bacteria as well. So when these protein fragments get into the bloodstream, our immune cells will say that amino acid sequence is too big to be the food particles, because we normally digest our protein all the way down to amino acids. So when you have these small protein fragments, our immune cells will interpret those protein fragments either as microbes that must be attacked, or other toxic compounds that have to be neutralized. And so they'll make a very vigorous immune response. If that incompletely digested protein happens to be a fragment from gluten or a fragment from casein, so these are the protein in grain, the protein in dairy, depending on your genetics, I will have a very vigorous immune response, which revs up all the immune responses in my bloodstream, which then sets the stage over several years to develop an autoimmune process. So it's currently being studied in a number of basic scientists, and say more clinicians are now thinking that leaky gut is that first step that needs to happen to develop an autoimmune disease. And the leaky gut is that zonulin gate being stuck partially open. not open like so severe that you have cholera, but open just enough that these proteins are getting into our bloodstream when they should not be. And it's creating confusion in our immune cells.
And so, in terms of testing for leaky gut, how would you go about testing to see if someone does have leaky gut?
Well, there are some tests where you can drink a compound that will have two kinds of sugars involved in them, and then measure the appearance of these sugars in your urine. Sometimes they'll label it so you can detect this with a breath test. And they look at the ratio of these two sugars to know is there leakiness in the gut. There are some measures that measure the zonulin damage directly with a blood test or a test in the stool. So we're getting more sophisticated tests for that. Another way that some people will look for that is to do some antibody tests for evidence of developing an immune response to foods. And if you are responding that you have, and you're making antibodies to many kinds of food proteins, that's a marker that you have a very leaky gut and lots of food proteins are getting out into your blood, creating this vigorous response. So there are a variety of ways of doing that. And it depends on your clinical symptoms, which test your practitioner may want to recommend.
And that's my next question. How would somebody know if they do have leaky gut?
Well, I would say some of the symptoms that the patient may experience may have to do with some bloating after eating. You're more likely to have bloating, gas. You're more likely to have problems with incompletely digested food showing up in the stool. And frankly, if you have an autoimmune problem, you probably have a leaky gut. If you have been taking a diet very, very high in sugar, you're more likely to have a yeast overgrowth that can add to a leaky gut. If you've been taking medications that have a lot daily use of aspirin, or the aspirin-like compounds such as ibuprofen, naproxen, naproxen. So we call those non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. That will make for a greater probability of a leaky gut. If you are drinking a lot of alcohol, that can make for a greater probability of a leaky gut.
So given that a leaky gut is obviously such a kind of critical factor in terms of future development of autoimmune conditions or other conditions, what should we be doing? Should we be running out and getting tested for leaky gut? Should we be addressing our nutrition? And I'm looking forward to diving into your nutrition principles. What's the approach we should take?
My clinical practice for 17 years was at the Veteran Affairs hospitals here in Iowa City. And that meant that the people I was taking care of were veterans. Typically, these were people who had very limited resources, living on with their disability income. So money was very tight. And the VA did not offer any kind of advanced testing for leaky gut or functional medicine type of stuff. And so I learned how to take care of all this stuff based on this old-fashioned thing known as taking a history, doing a physical exam. And we did extremely well. Uh,
So radical.
it's sort of radical. You talk to your patients, you do an exam, and we make some simple recommendations. And my presumption is that uh, most people with an autoimmune condition have a leaky gut. And given the types of scenarios I just described, people, with alcohol, aspirin use, nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drug use, um, people who had been on stomach acid lowering medication, I assumed all of them had leaky guts that would have to be fixed. And so we spent the first month really attending to what were all the nutritional strategies they could take to heal their leaky gut and improve their gut digestion. And I would say the vast, vast majority of folks could perceive tremendous benefit.
So let's talk about what some of those nutritional principles are and what somebody who's listening to today's podcast could perhaps go away and look at what they might be able to implement in their nutritional protocol.
Okay, so step number one is you want to take away the things that are contributing to overgrowth of yeasts. So sugar, white flour, kinds of products. So get rid of the sugar, replace flour-based products with vegetables. And in the beginning, I favor cooked vegetables, soups, and stews. I favor a lot of bone broth. The reason I like bone broth is that it has a lot of glycine, which is an amino acid that's very, very helpful and used by the intestinal lining cells to help them do the repair work. So, and they also have a lot of glutamine, which is another key amino acid that is necessary for the intestinal cells to repair themselves. So lots of bone broth. And then I want them to have plenty of vitamin A, vitamin D, and omega-3 fatty acids. So cod liver oil is very good for all of that. It has some vitamin A that's pre-made, has some vitamin D in there, and it has the omega-3 fats. Another nutrient that's really helpful for healing the gut is zinc. And you can get zinc in oysters, mussels, liver. And so we teach people how to cook with those three foods, and teach them how to make liver and onions, liver pate. And I try to have them have liver, oysters, mussels twice a week for that.
And that can be quite challenging for some people, eating organ meats.
They can be. And I have to remind everyone that the food we eat is all a culturally acquired taste. And so what we'd like to do is we would fix this food for our vets. We have little cooking classes, and they'd be quite surprised that organ meats could be very tasty. Usually people could either enjoy the oysters, mussels, liver pate, and having some guacamole, liver pate, and hot sauce wrapped up on a kale leaf or on a sliced rutabaga or in some celery stalks. People would be quite surprised at how tasty they were. I mean, if my teenage kids could bring their friends over and serve this stuff to them and have their fellow teenage friends like them, they really can be made in a very delicious way. Now, if people can't get themselves to think of that, then they certainly can get organ meat capsules, but that will be more expensive than just learning how to get the chicken livers and making some liver pate.
And it's actually not that difficult. I make my own chicken liver pate. It's great because you know exactly what's going into it, and it's delicious. And once it's all mushed up, it doesn't feel like livers.
That's right.
And I love the flavor of pate, so I really enjoy it.
And you put some guacamole, some avocado, some hot sauce on top, and a little heat and avocado, and you have no idea that you just managed to get the pate in. Another thing that we teach is you put it in, blend it up, and you put it in a soup, a small amount. You have no idea. And particularly if you add a little heat to the soup with it, either horseradish, ginger, or hot peppers, that will mask the flavor. Or you could put it in a taco blend or a tomato sauce blend so that you mask it with other foods. And if 10% of the meat is your liver, I would keep it a small amount. Start, very small, that where you're adding in the ground up liver. So you can just gradually sneak it in. And I would never tell your family that you've just added liver to the meat dish that you were serving. And when we have our cooking classes, we would do that. We would add in liver to the tacos, serve it, and our patients would go like, "Well, you're right. It's delicious. We had no idea."
Mm-hmm. I do that with my spaghetti bolognese sauce. I put some chicken livers in that, and I have a great meatloaf recipe. I just put a little bit of chicken liver in that, and it's all ground up. You would have no idea. No one knows that I'm putting it in there except for me. And everyone's like, "Oh, this is the most delicious meatloaf I've ever eaten." And I'm like, "Well, little do you know what's in there."
Correct. Here in the U.S., there are a number of companies that have liverwurst. That is a combination of sausage with some liver organ meats that have been ground into it. And again, very tasty. You'd have no idea that liver is part of the recipe.
You talk about high sulfur foods as being something that you like people to eat.
So
let's talk about them.
Sure. So sulfur is used in the detoxification pathways. And here in the US, and I imagine it must be true in Australia as well, that many of us have accumulated chemical pollutants from the internal and external chemicals that we encounter in our work life and in our home life that we store in our fat. And if you have a chronic health challenge, likely inefficient clearing of your toxins is part of why you developed your chronic health challenge. And so some of the things that we can do to make your enzymes that manage and get rid of those toxins more efficient and more effective is having you eat more of the cabbage family vegetables and onion family vegetables. That is why in my vegetable categories, the sulfur-rich vegetables, cabbage family, onion family, are a big part of the protocol. And so my goal is to have everyone have 3 cups in that sulfur category. And for my metric friends, they want to know, like, how many grams is that? And I say, I don't really know. But here's a simple way to think about it. If you have your dinner plate and you cover it up with your raw vegetables so you can't see any of the bottom of the dinner plate, that's 3 cups. And it's measured raw. So you cook all of that. It'll be about half that amount. And that's how many sulfur vegetables I want you to eat. Garlic is so potent that you only need 6 garlic cloves to the equivalent of 3 cups of garlic.
Right. Now, what do you do with people that do have intolerances or sensitivities? Because onion and garlic and the
Sure.
vegetables in those families seem to be, they cause people some enormous problems.
So now this is true. Um, so yeah, I'll step back for a moment. I recommend 9 cups of vegetables, 3 cups of greens, 3 cups of the sulfur-rich, 3 cups of deeply pigmented. And that's the public health message. And I always say you need to work with your primary care team to personalize this, because we're all unique with our own unique set of enzymes and our unique microbiome. So there will be some people whose their enzymes involving sulfur metabolism will be different, and they may be less efficient. So their body may tell them that if they try to eat the 3 cups of sulfur, they don't feel well. Or if they eat the 3 cups of greens, they're having too many loose stools. That's why I say you always have to work with your personal physician and to help you interpret this, so that if it's a problem for you, yes, you back down and you pay close attention to figure out what is the dose of garlic, the sulfur-containing vegetables that works for you. I'll also make the observation that as your microbiome changes, you may discover that, say, when you first tried to implement the Wahls Protocol, you couldn't tolerate all that sulfur. But perhaps a year into it, you'll have shifted your microbiome, and now, in fact, you do a much better job of tolerating a higher dose of sulfur. So these things can change over time.
They can. And I myself, when I first discovered I had small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, I was becoming quite problematic with the higher FODMAP, fructan and fructose foods. But these days I can eat everything. There's very few plant-based foods that I can't eat, which is wonderful because it gives me so much greater diversity than I had, say, 3.5 years ago when I first discovered this thing called SIBO. In terms of the 9 cups, is that per day? Is that per meal? I know people listening will be like, 9 cups? What? How in what time frame?
It's very funny. When I talk to my vets, they go like, is that per month? God, we'd laugh. I'd laugh so hard I thought I'd pee my pants sometimes. It's 9 cups per day. That's the target. Now, I'm a very tall lady. I'm 6 foot tall, and most of my patients were men. And I really wanted to have a big enough number, so I was filling them up with things that were good for them. And so my advice would be, look, I want you to have the protein that's the equivalent of 2 palms worth of protein, and then vegetables. And that's what you eat. So start with 9 cups, 3 platefuls of vegetables. A plateful of greens, a plateful of sulfur, a plateful of color. And you can sort of space out how you want to do that. If it's 3 different meals, if it's 2 meals, if it's 1 meal. And if you're really petite, and we do have some, in my clinical trials, we've had some very petite ladies, 4'10". That poor lass was certainly not doing 9 cups of vegetables. I think she was doing 5 to 6. And my advice to her was just eat proportionally what you can between the green, sulfur, and color categories. No need to stuff yourself. And if you're hungry, to my men, because I have some guys, really big guys, I said, you could have more than 9 cups, but keep eating proportionately the green, sulfur, color. And if you're doing heavy manual labor, yes, you might need more than 2 palm-size servings of meat.
And what about the diversity of foods? Obviously, we've talked about greens, sulfur foods, and deep pigmented color. Within those categories, are we then also aiming to have the broadest variety or the most number of different variety of plants within each those three categories?
Our ancestors would have been eating 200 different plant species per year. And forgive me, I've forgotten how many different animal species we have in a year. It's not quite 200, but it's certainly more than two. And so my advice to folks is it's a very fun thing to do, sort of keep track of how you're doing on the different kinds of plants you eat. And so the first thing we do in our first class is, okay, so how many different vegetables do you eat? And, it would not be uncommon to have only 3 or 4 or maybe 5. And so they would have the conversation, well, the goal is to get 200 different plant species in a year. And you can do this with teas, with spices, and keep coming in telling me how many different plant species you're up to. That helps people have a little more fun as a family, and it encourages them to be more willing to say, like, here's a new vegetable that we've never had. We ought to try, figure it out, and expand their taste and awareness. Incredibly helpful. I also talk about, you want to have things that are grown and that are local, because the shorter the time between harvest and consumption, the more nutrition you'll have in that meal, because you tend to lose some of the antioxidant activity, you tend to lose some of the vitamin activity the longer you get from harvest time to consumption time.
And what about choosing organic produce over just what you can buy in the supermarket that's non-organic?
Sure.
Should we be really putting a focus on organic produce? That's a good question, hey? I've got loads more just like this coming up after this break. We'll be back in a moment. And what about choosing organic produce over just what you can buy in the supermarket that's non-organic?
Sure.
Should we be really putting a focus on organic produce?
Well, I want to remind everyone that my clinical practice, for 17 years, were people who didn't have money, people who had very limited financial resources. And so we talk about, you do the best that you can. So sometimes my folks, they're starting out with their canned foods, and then they're working up to frozen foods. We talk about, yes, organic would be great if you can figure out how to do that financially. My vets taught me that, many of them figured out how to switch to eating primarily organic by the end of working with me for 3 months. They were gardening, they were going to the farmer's market, they were walking around to the various farmers and saying, if I come back at the very end of the farmer's market, what's the best price you can give me to take all of the rest of the produce that you have here? And so, these were very, very sharp folks. And they were hunting, and they were fishing, and they were foraging. So they were figuring out how to get more organic in. But absolutely, you certainly can still recover even if you're doing conventional food. Now, if you do conventional food, you are taking in, the pesticide load along with the food. And so it will take longer for you to clear all these the pesticides and pollutants that you've got stored in your own fat. It will take longer if you're still eating conventional food, but you will still recover. If you can figure out how to accommodate more organic food into your groceries, that will help you out. The one thing that I think, I really stress is you need to learn how to cook. Unless you're incredibly wealthy and that you can buy organic food and have your own personal chef come prepare it for you, the vast, vast majority of us are going to have to learn how to cook and learn how to prepare this food at home. And sadly, uh, way too many people have either never learned or have forgotten how to prepare food.
I think it is really sad. And I'm such a passionate foodie, having now written several cookbooks for the SIBO folk out there, because there were none when I first discovered I had SIBO. But one of the things that I find interesting is,
Would you
pardon?
mail a couple of your cookbooks to me? I'd love to see them.
Of course. Yes, of course. One of the things that I find interesting is, because there's a real focus on, you look at what's on TV at the moment, there's a huge number of cooking shows, and people, I think, are fearful that they have to make their food look like a Michelin star restaurant where it's the most beautiful creation ever put on a plate. You don't need to do that. It can be really simple. Good food doesn't need to be complex and take forever. You can steam some vegetables, you can grill, or you can poach. It doesn't need to be complex. And so I think that you teaching people how to cook. I have my cookbooks and my YouTube cooking show showing people that it can be really simple, helps to break down those fear barriers. How do you work with people that come to your clinic and go, Dr. Wahls, I just don't know how to cook. I hate cooking. This is not for me. I really don't want to do it. I'm used to eating takeout. How do you help them get over that initial barrier?
Well, the process that we have is the very first referral into me is for introductory lecture, where I tell my story, talk about functional medicine, and then let them know that we have a couple of options. One is to say, this is too hard. It's not the right time. I can't make this change. Another one is to say, I would like to make the change gradually, and they can meet with the dietitian one-on-one. And the other is that I will at least go gluten-free, dairy-free, and ramp up the vegetables. They can come to the group classes with us. At the group class, the first class is a half-day class, 2 hours with me, and there's 8 people that come through at a time, and we do an initial intake where we have talk about what were all their environmental exposures and help prioritize what we'd like them to do. The next 2 hours is with the dietitian, who makes cooked greens, a green smoothie, and they eat that together and realize, like, it was very fast, takes hardly any time. It's delicious. Both those things are quite delicious. And then they reimagine what breakfast will look like, what lunch will look like, and what meals will look like. And we have a series of cooking classes. I'm very mindful of several things. People are stressed for time and energy and money. So we make things that are simple. I'm very keen on skillet meals, so you can make everything in one big pot in a skillet, and that you should be done within and eating within 30 minutes of starting. So that this is a manageable amount of effort. And that we wanted to find things that people could find in a grocery store in rural Iowa. And so that was also part of why I wrote Cooking, the Wahls Protocol, Cooking for Life, in a format so that I presumed that people may not know how to cook, and that they may be trying to deal with pretty basic grocery stores. This is not exotic 5-star chef, exotic ingredient cooking. This is cooking for real people who have real jobs and unhappy kids that they're all trying to accommodate.
That's wonderful. Just around the diversity of plant-based foods, if somebody is at that point, and I speak to many people who are literally eating chicken, carrots, and maybe some squash, and that's all they're tolerating at this point in time. And even those foods are reacting to them. How they might have heard you say, ideally you get to 200 plant-based foods per annum, and they'll be like, "You've got to be crazy. There's like, I'm eating 3 foods. How do I get to 200 different plant-based foods?" Like, how do you work with people when they're at that super reactive phase?
Tea. All sorts of teas, herbal teas, great way to start. That adds tremendous amount of diversity. So that's a very, very easy way to start. And broths, bone broth can be very healing. So that first month or several months is focused not on many plants, but a lot more on bone broth, bone. And I actually may use more of a ketogenic diet in the beginning. People with a lot of SIBO may do better in a ketogenic diet at first.
One of my questions was around fat intake. We're talking about having a really broad and diverse and plentiful plant-based approach. But what about fats, particularly with the ketogenic diet, which has gained in popularity and awareness in recent times, it seems, and that promotes a much higher fat intake, a very high fat intake indeed. Should we all be eating a higher fat diet? Does it only work for some? What's your views on the ketogenic approach?
A ketogenic diet is basically means that our mitochondria are burning fat as the fuel to generate energy that we use to run the chemistry of life. And our mitochondria can burn sugar, and they could burn protein in the form of amino acids. And the fact that our mitochondria can burn fat, amino acids, or sugar gives us a lot of what we call flexibility. That we can burn fat is how we survive famine, war, winter, drought. When everything's died off and we are living off of our stored fat, that's when we're mobilizing our fat and our mitochondria are burning fat. We have, beginning in the early 1900s, physicians at the Mayo Clinic figured out that if you gave kids a water diet so that they were burning their own fat, their seizures stopped. And before we had any seizure medications, it was certainly life-saving. And so that became a popular approach to get control of seizures for kids. I think about beginning around 1909. Then Dilantin came on the market, and this sort of fell out. And then as there was awareness that more and more kids were having seizures, we weren't getting control of the seizures. There were multiple drugs being used. I believe in the 1960s, there was interest came back to going to this ketogenic diet. And Johns Hopkins figured out that if they gave people a lot of cream and eggs, 90% of the diet coming from fat, and they gave them vitamins, synthetic vitamins, that it was again generated ketones and got rid of the seizures. And so that the interest grew and began to use ketogenic diets to treat a variety of things: seizures, brain cancer, polycystic ovarian disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. I studied the setting of MS. and diabetes, fatty liver disease. There are certainly many, many books written about it. So there's certainly more recognition that there are health benefits with it. One of the concerns that I potentially see with ketogenic diets is that it changes a bunch of hormonal signals in the body, because one of the hormonal signals that being ketosis generates is that there's not enough resources in terms of protein and sugar. So my hormones are saying, do not reproduce. So we're going to repair the body and try reproduction next year. So that's a really great thing if you have a neurodegenerative problem, because it sends a signal for my brain to get in there and start repairing stuff. If I'm trying to get pregnant, I'm not going to get pregnant, although I would not use this as your sole method of birth control, by the way. But it certainly decreases fertility. It may decrease your efficiency at protecting yourself from infection. There's some evidence that infection risk goes up. And there may be changes on your thyroid hormone status. There's clearly changes on your sex hormone status. So I think long-term ketosis, from my mind, there's not a really good answer in terms of what's safe long-term. Many, and probably all of the ketogenic diets out there, they've really focused on the macronutrient ratios. That is, what percent of fat, protein, carbs. No one is teaching people how to make sure you're getting all the micronutrients that you need to maintain nutritional status. I'm the only author that has, even in the medical community, I'm just shocked that, Johns Hopkins created a ketogenic diet. They put people in the hospital to start them on it. They have a very intensive supplementation program, and they monitor the nutritional status because they know the way they've designed the diet is not nutritionally balanced. So they have to really monitor folks. All these books out there for ketogenic diets, no one's really monitored the micronutrient status. So you'll feel great for the first 18 months, and then your micronutrients get depleted and your health may begin to deteriorate. So I would rather people use my version, which is more micronutrient replete. I think there may be a reason to do cyclic ketosis, sort of like winter. So what I do is every winter I go in ketosis, and then during the summer, my berries are coming in, my vegetables are coming in, and I switch to a low glycemic index diet. I'm out of ketosis through the summer, and then in fall, I'm back in ketosis again.
I think it's a really great approach for people to be thinking about the seasons, that, the seasons change, the produce changes. So our bodies also change. Because of our Western approach and our Western diet, we often just eat the same old thing throughout the year, regardless of whether it's truly in season or not. And being more in tune with the seasonal fluctuations, I think
it's
really
much better, and I think it's better for us to cycle through foods seasonally. All the plants we eat are a mixture of compounds that are really, really great for us and that are slightly toxic for us. But the fact that they're slightly toxic for us actually revs up our detoxification pathways and has, some great benefits. But it's also why diversity in the plants is so incredibly good for us. So kale, I love kale. Kale is great food for us, but you shouldn't eat kale every single day. you should eat kale, and then you should eat beet greens, then you should have turnip greens, then you should have parsley, you should have spinach, and then come back to kale, and so have a wide variety of greens. Because every plant is a mixture of things that compounds that are bioactive, that are really, really good for you, and a few compounds that are not quite so good for you. Even water is life-saving. But if you drink too much water, you can kill yourself with hyponatremia. And that is probably true for the vast majority of the foods that we consume. Liver is really good for us twice a week. But if you have a polar bear liver, it's going to have too much vitamin A, and you'll make yourself quite ill. So it's all having to do with being mindful of the variety and the dose.
Something that I do to get that diversity and to really work with the seasons is we've got this gorgeous organic fruit and veg company here in Melbourne, Australia, and they deliver a box to you every week, and they pick what goes in the box because it's all based on what's seasonally available. And I use it as like this surprise. This is what I'm cooking, and it's really great because I get vegetables that I wouldn't normally choose, and then it forces me out of my comfort zone, which is a good thing because I love to cook. And then I have these beautiful greens and seasonal produce that's all organic, and it's just divine. And we don't eat a lot of meat these days, but we now source our meat direct from our farmers, and we get these boxes of meat that it's all completely organic and pasture fed, and no antibiotics are used. We've even visited a farm to I'm quite protective of my food, so I go and visit the farmers to check they are what they say they are. And it's a really lovely way of not only supporting local business, but eating a good diversity of foods that are actually raised or grown in really good ways. And it makes me feel better about what I'm putting in my mouth.
And let me add to that. When you think about how you're spending your money, putting your money back into your local community in terms of, the internet's really convenient, but I'd much rather go spend my money at my local organic grocer, with the community-sponsored agriculture, with the local farmer, because I'm reinvesting into my community. And to me, there's no better place to invest than in my community. So I think what you're describing is just a wonderful development. I'm very excited to see that. I encourage everyone to think about how to spend as much money as you can in your local community, because you're helping your friends, your neighbors, your schools, and you're helping your community thrive.
You are, definitely, and it feels great to support them. For the person that's listening today that is in the bottom of the pit and they're thinking, oh, well, it's very well for you, Dr. Wahls and Rebecca, you've achieved improved health. I'm nowhere near that. I feel miserable today. I can barely get out of bed. What's your advice to someone that's, back at that point that they're just going, I literally cannot put one foot in front of the other, let alone even think of how I'm going to get 200 different plant-based foods in my diet?
It starts. When I started, it was a struggle to walk 10 feet. I struggled to do my little 10-minute, very tiny little workout. But you begin with where you're at. You begin taking what little steps that you can. I think it can be very, very helpful to reflect on what is it you want your health for. And you may need to sort out, I'm willing to begin the journey now, or that, no, I'm not willing. This is not the right time in my life. And then come back to this when you are willing to begin taking your first step. And you can sort of think through what are the first steps you want to take. It might be that your first step is adapting a stress-reducing activity and being engaged in prayer and meditation and mindfulness, and having greater clarity of your life's purpose. And then maybe the next step after that is replacing sugar and white flour with vegetables, or working on bone broth. But for many, the first step is really understanding what is it that you want your health for, and having a much clearer understanding of your life's purpose and the meaning you attach to this journey. When you have clarity, then you may begin to see how you can start taking the steps.
And it doesn't happen all at once. And I was just recently reminded of the distance I've traveled so far with another condition I have. And just over a year ago, I finally got to the core root of why I had quite debilitating back and hip pain. And I finally discovered I have a damaged disc at the base of my spine. After years and years and years of seeking the opinions of many practitioners and no one being able to tell me what it was, because my symptoms weren't typical. And when I literally kind of stumbled into the rooms of an osteopath here in Melbourne, and in tears, in excruciating agony, and I said, I just need someone to find what's wrong with me. And he did. And he put me onto a rehabilitation program that when I first started, all I could do was literally just do the movements. I couldn't add any resistance or weights or anything to it. And I could literally do one repetition and then I was done. And I was I was crying from extreme pain because it was just overwhelming. There's a specialized back rehab place here in Melbourne that I now go to. There were some machines I couldn't even sit on because they triggered the nerve pain so extremely. So I've been going every single week, twice a week, for the last just over 12 months. And not only have I got myself out of pain, but I'm now also able to not only sit in the machines I couldn't even get into a year ago, but I can now use them. And I was thinking about this the other day as I was sitting on one of these new machines, and and I've got some weight going through it, and I was like, oh my gosh, look at how far I've come. Now, it would have felt like it was an insurmountable mountain to climb just over 12 months ago. But because I consistently got up every week and I went and did it, and I did my half an hour exercises 2 or 3 times a week, and just did it without, bitching and moaning. But I was like, I've just got to do this. I've just got to invest in my health, in my back and my body to get my pain down, because I can't do anything while I'm in excruciating pain. And, fast forward about 13 months. And here I am today. I can not only, I couldn't even put socks on or put shoes on 12 months ago. And now I can do all sorts of things. I can lift things, and it's amazing. But it starts with a single step.
Yeah. The Therapeutic Lifestyle Clinic that I ran at the VA, the number one reason people came to us was pain. And so absolutely, it is a very integral part of pain management is the dietary part, the stress reduction part, and the rehab exercise part. And all three of those domains interplay so well at addressing pain. So I'm thrilled that you've done well. And I certainly want to echo for everyone my remarkable recovery really, began in 2002 when I first started working on making dietary changes. And I experimented, I kept at it, tinkering slowly, making adjustments, and just stayed with it, paid attention to my response, made adjustments, paid attention to my response, made adjustments, and just stayed with that. And all of your listeners hopefully will learn that they need to be their best advocate, to pay deep attention to their response, try interventions, see how they respond, and keep tinkering. Because their journey will be different than mine. It will be different than yours, but it is their journey, and it is their responsibility to go on it and learn and keep making slow progress. And sometimes you'll screw up and you'll lose ground, like, well, shit, that intervention didn't work out so well. So I need to do it either more slowly, or I need something slightly different. But always keep learning and keep being willing to try.
Something someone said to me once was approach it with interest and intrigue.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really great, because I see myself as a walking science experiment of one, and I am interested and intrigued by my body and what it does for me, what sometimes it doesn't like when I try new things, but I always come at it with this curiosity rather than fear. Because if I do try something and it doesn't work, I then go, well, that was really interesting. It's really interesting that didn't work for me. I'm going to try that again in a month's time, but it didn't work for me today. Okay, thanks for letting me know, body. That's fine. I'll mark that up and I'll try again.
Our children are really good at learning, at being little scientists, trying things, noticing that works well or doesn't work well, and getting rewarded. And we need to be willing to do that. We try stuff, pay attention. It was helpful or not helpful, and just keep being willing to try and pay attention to how you respond.
Yeah. Now we've got some exciting news for the listeners in Australia, at least, that you are coming down under in April for some events. So I'm so excited to be able to share with the listeners of the Healthy Gut podcast. You'll be here in Melbourne and Sydney, and I've got a really exciting giveaway for people to win a ticket to the live streaming event. So make sure you head to the show notes page so you can read more about that. But before we finish up, I'd love for you to tell my listeners what your events are here down under.
So I'll be coming, and I'm working with Terry King. We've been writing up the show. There'll be 2 shows. A show that is sort of focused on general strategies for improving health, reducing symptoms. And the second show is really focused more on teaching people the principles of functional medicine and a more comprehensive approach to autoimmune and really more complex neurological problems. I think the shows, it's about 2.5 hours. There's a potty break in the middle for me, because it's a long time for me. And they're just going to be fabulous, fun event shows with live teaching and some audience participation, fun activities. It's going to be very, very fun. So we'll have, and it's lay friendly. I think I do a lovely job of teaching these complicated concepts in a way that I think are easily understood by the lay public. And then I'm also going up to Sydney and doing the same show in Sydney. You should have the dates in your show notes, but I believe it's April 21st and May 5th. We're also going to have a few days to go have some fun around Melbourne and fun around Sydney, and get to see some Australia fair as well. And I'm looking forward to that. And then there's a clinician event that will be with bioceuticals at the research symposium there. And then I'm also meeting with some of Australia's wellness researchers to talk about wellness research in MS. They asked me if I would meet with them, and so I'm excited about that. So should be very
It's
fun.
going to be great.
I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
it.
it's going to be great to have you out here. Now, for those people that aren't in Australia and won't get to see you in person, or they might be in Australia and still can't see you in person, but would love to connect with you, what's the best way for people to reach out and connect with you and see more of what you do?
So I have a website, terrywahls.com, and that's Terry, Wahls, WAHLS.com. And there lots of information. We have resources there to help people learn more, a membership site where you can hear the most current lectures that I've been giving, and there's a 2-year curriculum. We have a menu program where people can get menus and shopping lists for a year. And then I have a in-person 3-day seminar and retreat every August that we have people from all over the globe coming to that. We also train clinicians to get certified in the Wahls Protocol. Last year, we had people from 6 different countries coming, including some Australians, by the way.
Woohoo!
And I think we have Australians again signing up to come. So we sold out last year, and I expect that we will sell out again this year as well for that event. So,
Well,
lots of
Dr. Terry
things.
Wahls, yeah, it's been wonderful to have you on the show today and sharing your vast knowledge with my listeners. So thank you so much for coming on to the Healthy Gut podcast.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I really hoped you enjoyed today's episode with Dr. Terry Wahls. I know I have just learnt so much from her. If you would like to see the show notes from today's episode, head to thehealthygut.co/Terry, and that's Terry. Now, if you would like to get access to the full transcription of today's show, make sure you sign up as a member of the Healthy Gut podcast. And all you need to do is head to thehealthygut.co/Terry or thehealthygut.co/podcast to sign up. And as soon as you sign up, you'll get access to the transcription. Now, Dr. Terry Wahls has offered the Healthy Gut podcast listeners the opportunity to win a ticket to the on-demand stream of her Australian events. We've just had the Melbourne event and the Sydney one is coming up. These tickets are worth $99 each and they are free to help the Healthy Gut podcast members. So, guys, make sure you have signed up. Put your name and email address down so that you can go in the draw to win one of these tickets. The recording is yours for a period of 18 months, so you can really make the most of this invaluable information. I attended her Melbourne event and I just got so much out of it. She is such an inspirational woman and she knows so much around the positive impact that our diet, nutrition and lifestyle can have on our health, particularly when we're dealing with a chronic illness. So for everybody that has entered or has signed up to become a Healthy Gut podcast member by putting their name and email address down, you will go in the draw to be selected at random to win one of these 6 tickets. And the draw will occur on Thursday, the 26th of April at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Now, guys, don't forget to subscribe in Apple Podcasts or the app you use to listen to the show. And I would love it if you could leave a rating and review. Dig Kid gave the podcast 5 stars and said, I just want to say thanks that this podcast has improved my quality of life on so many levels. I have high methane SIBO. I have been a patient of Dr. Sandberg Lewis for about a year. Since I first started this podcast up until now, I have learned so much. It's crazy. Every podcast I learn something new and I have so many aha moments. It's a great tool in anyone's journey through SIBO or gut healing. I don't think I'd be where I am in my healing process today without Rebecca's help. Thank you so much, Dig Kid, for leaving that review. It just warms my heart so much that this podcast has helped you. And don't forget, guys, if you've got some feedback on the podcast or you'd like to tell others why you find the podcast so helpful, make sure you leave a rating and review. And you can always follow me and the podcast and The Healthy Gut on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest and Google+. Just look for Rebecca Coombs and The Healthy Gut. Coming up on next week's show, we have Dr. Megan Taylor joining us, and she'll be talking all about visceral hypersensitivity and pain. Us SIBOers can feel more pain, we can be more prone to pain. So Dr. Taylor and I talk about why that is, what's happening in our bodies when we're reacting badly to pain, and what we can do about it. I can't wait to be back with you next week, guys, talking about that with Dr. Megan Taylor. You've been listening to the Healthy Gut podcast with your host, Rebecca Coombs. To learn more about the Healthy Gut or our podcast, head to thehealthygut.co/podcast. And as we are fully funding this podcast, if you would like to help support the continuation of this podcast so that we can continue to bring you future episodes, all you need to do is make a contribution at thehealthygut.co/podcast. We would like to thank Red Lemon Productions for the production and original music score of this podcast. To find out more about their services, head to redlemonproductions.com. The Healthy Gut podcast is a production of The Healthy Gut. Thanks for listening.